Okay, so this just happened 2 nights ago, and I've barely slept since, thinking this guy is surely coming back for me. I've spoken to the police about this incident and they sent a car out to do a patrol, but nothing else has happened since then. I don't know if I'm overreacting, but it has me really freaked out. So, at about 11 p.m., I was out taking my dog for a pre-bed poop. I live in a semi-urban neighborhood where very few people are out on the street at night. As I was walking, suddenly a man came out of an alleyway towards me as I walked past. Excuse me, miss." My dog and I both got a big fright. She started going off at him immediately like I'd never seen her do before. She's a pretty little rescue border collie retriever who can be reactive to people, so sometimes barks and panics. But this was something else entirely. She was going ballistic, lunging, growling, snapping at him like she was ready to bite his face off. At first, I thought it was just because he'd given us both a big scare, but as soon as I took a better look at him, my stomach dropped immediately. I had an instant sick feeling telling me to get away from here. There was nothing particularly scary looking about him, but something was screaming at me that something was wrong with this guy. I told him not to come any closer. I told him my dog was dangerous and she would bite him. But he just kept inching closer to me, whispering, "Let me come closer," over and over again as he crept towards me. My dog got between him and finally he stopped moving. Do you know where insert my address is? I had never seen this man before in my life, but somehow he managed to pull my address out of thin air. I told him I had no idea where that was, and then, to scare him off, I told him again he needed to leave because my dog was on the verge of attacking him. The man just kept saying, "Just let me come closer," as he continued to creep towards me. Finally, I turned around and sprinted away to my house with my dog into an area with more streetlights. I called my housemate and told her to make sure everything was locked. Then I waited under the streetlight until she came out and met me. I really hoped that he just pulled a random address out of thin air or something, and it just happened to be mine. But I don't like the chances of that just being a coincidence, though. In September of 2002, my wife was in her 7th month of pregnancy with our first child. We lived in Ohio at the time, and she wanted a baby shower. Since most of her family and close friends lived in Baltimore, Maryland, we planned that we would travel to Baltimore and have the baby shower there on Saturday, October 19th, 2002. On October 3rd and 4th, though, we were brought the horrifying realization that a serial killer was on the loose in the Baltimore, D.C. area. We naturally re-examined our plans, but decided to go through with them all the same. After all, the likelihood of being this sniper's victim was practically zero from a statistical point of view. My wife and I listened to the news of the Beltway Sniper in the days leading up to our trip. It was getting a bit more scary, as the death count had now raised to 9, and there were 2 additional people who had been wounded. In the 11th hour, we decided we would still go, but instead we would take the PA Turnpike over to I-70, then I-70 through Hagerstown, MD, then Frederick, and then into Baltimore. Around 5 p.m. on Friday, October 18th, my wife and I picked up my mom and my stepsister, and we set out for our trip. The trip was going slowly, but otherwise uneventful. We had used most of the time to review the plans of what to do when we needed to stop during our trip out. The plan was that we would all go together, not dilly-dally, get out of the car and into the building quickly, and vice versa. No one was to stay in the car alone. Well, as happens eventually, around 12:45 a.m. on Saturday morning, we all needed a restroom break. We pulled off into a rest stop near Frederick and parked right in front of the door to the bathroom facility. The rest area was largely empty, but there was a dark blue late model 4-door sedan parked head-in facing the door to the restroom. I parked right next to this car, and we all quickly reviewed the rules. If I finished first, I would wait for them and we would all return to the car together. We got out and raced to the restrooms. As I ran into the restroom area, I didn't pay too much attention to the car we parked next to other than to make sure they didn't open their doors. The night was crisp and full of moisture. I finished first, and so I stood by the exit but stayed inside the building. The doors and the walls were all glass, so I nervously scanned the parking lot for anything off-looking. Satisfied there was nothing ominous in the lot, I turned my attention back to that blue sedan. I travel a lot, so naturally I took note that their license plates were from New Jersey. In the front seat were two African-American males. The one behind the steering wheel was middle-aged. He was wide awake and staring back at me. Next to him was a sleeping teenager. I remember feeling a sudden chill go down my spine as I observed him watching me. At this time, the authorities hadn't released any info on the snipers, and they didn't know the ominous role the car played in their killing spree. I was ignorant of the danger these two really presented. A few minutes passed before my family returned, and we all ran back to the car. In a flash, we sped away and continued on to our destination. As we left, I remember noticing something weird about their trunk area. My family was poor growing up, so we sometimes had to pop out a broken lock and couldn't afford to fix it right away. We would rig the trunk open using a screwdriver during those times. I remember thinking that's what they must have done with their trunk. It turns out that was the exact hole they shot out through while staying concealed. The baby shower went well and my wife had fun. We didn't go out for meals or anything, but slept and ate at her mom's house in Baltimore. On Sunday morning, it was time to go. We took a much more northern route going back just to be safe. About a week or so later, once they'd captured the Beltway Snipers, you can imagine the renewed chills running down my spine. When in the newspaper, the face of the man that had been staring at me when we stopped to pee at the rest stop, John Allen Muhammad, was staring back at me once again. There was also a photo of the car we had parked next to. Scarier still, the reports said they had been captured in that exact same rest stop about a week later. I can only assume the teenage boy that had been asleep next to him was Lee Boyd Malvo. Fortunately, they were both in the front seat. This was apparently where they had planned to hide out and sleep between their kills, so they likely wouldn't have done so at this particular rest stop. Therefore, I feel we weren't in the most danger during this encounter. Had we encountered them slightly out of there, though, we may well have been. So this happened a couple of years ago. We used to live in a house in the mountains. The only neighbor we had wasn't that close by to our home, so there was literally no one else around. This happened on a Sunday. I had my daughter, who was 13 at the time, coming for the weekend. She was sleeping upstairs and my bedroom was downstairs. I wasn't quite feeling tired yet, so I was in the living room watching TV when I decided to go outside to contemplate the stars. The thing is, I had let my door semi-open because there was only one handle, and the other side of the door could only be opened with a key, so no handle on the outside. I contemplated the stars for about 5 minutes. Then, I felt like I could smell a weird smell or something. I went back inside, and at this point it was 3 a.m., so I decided to go back to sleep. I remember being abruptly woken at 6 a.m. I could see the sunrise, so I decided to open my window a bit since it was extremely hot inside. I stood up at the edge of the window when suddenly I felt a hand pushing me on my back. I was pushed out of my window by someone behind me. The thing is, there was only me and my daughter in the house. I got pushed out of my own house by a stranger, and my daughter was still inside. They immediately closed the window, and now I couldn't open the front door either because I didn't have the keys on me. I knew that my neighbor was a locksmith, so I rushed as quickly as I could to his house, woke him up at 6 a.m., and explained the emergency to him. He took his stuff and came with me immediately. Now I'll tell you the part my daughter experienced. She told me she could hear what sounded like an old man coughing, and she didn't recognize the voice. Instantly, she went into the bathroom, locked the door, and turned on the tap while she called the police. The neighbor managed to open the door and we both rushed upstairs. Whilst rushing up there, I could notice a knife was missing from my knife set in the kitchen. As we arrived at the top, we saw the door to my daughter's room was wide open. We turned on the lights and saw an old man in a hood wielding one of my knives, waiting in front of the bathroom door. My neighbor and I beat the ever-loving shit out of him and waited until the police came. The man was arrested, and the week after, we moved away to another county. This story from my past happened about 32 years ago in East Texas. My mom and dad divorced when I was 16 years old, and my brothers and I lived with my mom from then on. My dad visited us every once in a while, but not really on a consistent basis. He was a bit of a gambler, one of the reasons my parents split up in the first place, and tended not to come around when he was broke. On the rare occasions that he won big though, he would visit and spend a lot of money on us kids, then disappear once again. My dad told me he had a job as a shuttle driver for a local hotel. He told my brothers and I that the shuttle driving was just a cover though. He actually worked for organized crime, which he claimed owned that particular hotel. He said his real job was to drive out to various places in the area to pick up fugitives running from warrants or otherwise wanted by law enforcement, bring them to the place to hide, and then later move them on by means my dad said he didn't know. My dad was always a bit of a blowhard though, and always exaggerating or flat out lying, so my brothers and I just blew this off and didn't really think much of his claims, until something strange happened. My dad suddenly disappeared. It was 1988, and I was 22 years old and a college student still living at home. I worked as a full-time disc jockey on the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., at my local radio station. My middle brother was 19 years old and lived in an apartment with a friend. He worked at a nearby Dairy Queen. My youngest brother was 9 and lived at home with mom. One day, my brother called my mom and I and asked us if we knew where my dad was. He said some men had come to the Dairy Queen while he was at work and asked him if he'd seen him. My brother had truthfully told them he hadn't seen or heard from my dad in months, and he would often do things like that, just cut off contact for months at a time. The men didn't say who they were, but seemed satisfied with this and left. My brother wondered if these men or anyone had called to talk to us and ask us where my dad was and why they might have done so, but we also had not heard from him in a while. The following day, the men returned to his work, and this time they flashed badges, claiming to be FBI agents. They were very aggressive and demanded my brother tell them where my dad was or else. My brother kept insisting, of course, truthfully, that he didn't know where my dad was. Last he heard, he worked at a local hotel as a shuttle driver. The experience really upset him, and he called my mom and I again. Upset, my mom called the hotel where my dad worked, only to find out that he had disappeared weeks ago, and nobody had any idea where he'd gone off to. The following day, my brother was at work again, when his roommate called and said that someone had apparently been in their apartment. The roommate claimed that when he got home from work, he'd found the sliding glass door wide open and the place completely ransacked. Nothing was missing either. Obviously, my brother was very upset. He went to his apartment and found that in fact his address book was missing from the breakfast nook, and a teddy bear he'd recently bought for his son and a photo of his son were missing from his bedroom. Now all of us were beside ourselves with anger, fear, and paranoia. We went down to the local FBI office to complain that they had done this to us and to tell them once and for all that my brother did not know where my dad was. Well, as you might have guessed, the FBI had no knowledge of the event and claimed they were not looking for my dad either. None of their agents had contacted my brother. Furthermore, when my mother told them my dad had claimed he worked for organized crime, the FBI would neither confirm nor deny that the hotel had ties and that there was an investigation going on. My mom called the hotel again and told the manager that men had been looking for my dad, terrorizing my brother, and flat out asked if there was any truth to my dad's claim to be working for organized crime. The man laughed and told her there was no such thing as the mafia. While we were trying to make sense of all these extremely weird details, we kept wondering why my brother was being harassed but not my mother or me. Then though, that's when I was reminded of a strange event that had happened to me about 2 or 3 weeks prior. Because I work overnight, I was often wide awake in the middle of the day on my days off, with nothing to do. One night, I went to the local cable TV company where my friend worked as a computer system operator to hang out with him for a few hours and BS a little. At about 3:30 a.m., he had a big computer job to do, so it was time for me to go home. I left. As soon as I pulled out of his company's driveway, a car immediately pulled in behind me, tailgating me. I mean, he was on me so quickly, it was like he knew I was going to be there. They seemed to just appear out of nowhere too. This person had their high beams on and was blinding me. I couldn't make out anything about the car behind me. I couldn't see inside to see how many people were in either, what they looked like, or anything. I changed lanes immediately to let this tailgater pass, but he changed lanes to be right behind me once again. I moved, he moved. He was tailgating me and blinding me, and now seemed to be following me. I stopped at the intersection and got in the left turning lane with my signal on. He did the exact same. Since there was no other traffic anywhere at all around, when the light changed, I zoomed across the intersection and streaked across all the lanes of traffic into the far right lane. I did this trying to lose him, but he followed me exactly. Now it was absolutely clear he was for sure following me. I cut into a nearby neighborhood and tried to lose him, but he still followed me through it. I finally managed to zoom back out to the intersection, cross over, and go to the 7-Eleven at the corner. I jumped out and ran inside, and screamed to the clerk that someone was chasing me. As I did, I saw the car following me cut through the parking lot of the 7-Eleven, and for the first time I got a good look. It was a late-model tan-colored 4-door, and there were 2 white men in it. The clerk blew me off immediately, telling me I was just exaggerating, and it was probably just some kids messing with me. He told me to leave. I left, and I was still really spooked. I didn't want to go straight home. I was afraid they would still follow me, and I didn't want them to know where I lived. Instead, I went to my workplace. I knew the disc jockey on air that night would be my friend Paula, so I decided to go visit her on air for a little bit and hang out and calm down. I told her what happened, and we stayed there for about 2 hours. She also reassured me it was just some punks being jerks, and that really calmed me down. When I got home though, now over 2 hours since this car had followed me, I saw that damn car was at my house now. As I was coming down the street to my apartments and about to turn right, I saw that damn car pull out of my apartment space. As it passed by, the SOBs flashed their high beams on and off at me. It was them. What the fuck? I panicked and called Paula at the radio station and told her what happened. I was freaked out as to how they could possibly know where I lived. Why would they wait 2 hours for me? And why, when they finally saw me, flash their lights at me and just leave? Now, remembering that event and putting it together with my brother's FBI visit and apartment break-in, it seemed obvious this was all tied together. I hadn't really thought about it before, but now that I remembered, my car I was driving that night was actually my dad's car. He had given it to me about 2 months earlier when he got a new one, so if someone had been looking for my dad, they must have thought I was him. When they saw me coming home, they realized I wasn't and just left. But who was doing this, and why? Where was my dad, and why were these strange people coming after us? My mom, my brother, and I went to the local police and filed a missing persons report and a complaint. We spoke to a very nice detective. About 5 days later, we got a call. He had solved this entire strange case. As it turns out, my dad had disappeared because he owed his employers more than $50,000 in gambling debts. The detective confirmed my dad did work for some unsavory characters. He was now hiding out in Nevada. When we asked them who the hell these men were and why they were bothering us, The detective explained it was not uncommon for unsavory bounty hunters and debt collectors to impersonate law enforcement and harass the family. My brother asked how they'd gotten into his apartment. The detective showed him how easily a sliding glass door was to open. They'd probably stolen the address book hoping it had my dad's contact information in it, and stole the teddy bear and pictures to use to threaten my brother. The detective said because my dad had used my brother as a reference on his job application at the hotel, that gave them my brother's address and phone number. Those FBI agents probably figured he was closer to my dad and either maintained contact with him or if threatened would contact him. Eventually, my dad did turn up back in town and acted like none of this ever happened. He never spoke of the incident, and we never brought it back up either. I guess he got the money he owed them in the end, and I don't really want to know how. This was 1992. My mother was going through a bad patch in her marriage, and chemotherapy for breast cancer as well. We lived in a very quiet town where residential areas only had small markets. For everything else, including pharmacy and public calls, we had to go to the main market, which was about 3.5 miles away from our house. 1.5 from our apartment block to the main road, then 2 miles to the market either by walk or public transport. My mother was going through an especially tough time given my father's complete disconnect from us. She used to call her brother for advice and catharsis, and he lived in another city. For those calls, she had to go to the public call office, which was run by these two extremely weird men. The same market had the pharmacy where my mother would buy her medicines as well. I was 11 years old, and my older sister was 17. One evening, my mother, along with my sister, went to the PCO to talk to my uncle. I don't remember why, but I think my father had asked her to leave the house, and she wanted to discuss what her options were. She was in extreme distress and didn't realize how late it was until she'd finished the call. The market was now closed, and so was the public transport as well. My mom and sis paid the bill and started their walk home on the path next to the main road. What they didn't know, though, is that the two PCO owners had closed down the PCO and started following them. One on foot right behind them trying to offer a ride eventually, and the other on a bicycle nearby them on the deserted main road. My mother strictly refused their offer and held my sister tightly. They started walking as fast as they could when a white van appeared on the service road and started driving slowly next to them. The guys had already arranged a ride with some really bad intentions. It was obvious they were not going to just go away. In fact, they had been waiting the entire time for them to get onto the main road to strike. On the next turn, two men came from the opposite side on the footpath as well. Much to my mother's relief, though, it was the pharmacist and his friend, who had just happened to be returning to pick up his car from his shop's parking after a long walk. They saw the men and the van and immediately realized what was going on. They stopped and asked if they needed help. They agreed to walk them home as well. The PCO men had immediately fled upon seeing the guys coming up. Thankfully, that kind pharmacist saw my mother and sister to the safety of our house, and my mother never went to that PCO ever again. So my mom is the youngest of 7 girls. Her oldest sister is 20 years older than her, and all I knew about her was that she had a history of mental health disorders. She never treated them, and my mom, because of that, had not spoken to her since she was about 10 years old. To be honest, at the time this happened, I didn't even really know this aunt existed. One day, when my brother and I were about 6 and 7 respectively, my parents sat us down and showed us a picture of our aunt. They told us if she ever tried to talk to us around the neighborhood, to immediately run to the closest home and call them right away. They stressed that she was very dangerous and to treat her as basically a stranger. My brother and I were so confused because this was my mom's sister. She was family. But okay. Fast forward about a year later. My family was at my cousin's basketball game. This is the daughter of the aunt in the story. My aunt had walked out on the family about 10 years before, so there was no reason to think we would see her there. My brother and I begged my mom to let us get something from the snack stand, so we went over and stood in the line. I felt a sharp tap on my shoulder suddenly and turned around. It was my aunt, or at least it appeared to be the woman in the picture. "Hi there, I'm your aunt. You recognize me?" I said hello because I didn't want to be rude. She said the same thing to my brother as well, but he didn't respond. Then she said, "Well, this line is so long. How about I take you guys to get some ice cream instead?" I didn't know what to say. This was my aunt. It's not like I could be rude. My brother intruded though. "No, we have to go back to our mom now." She said something along the lines that our mom had said it was okay. We were her niece and nephew after all. She would never harm us. That was it for me. I turned around to leave. Then I felt a tight grip on my wrist and was being dragged with my brother for the door. I didn't yell. I don't know why. I was a kid and I had a piercing scream. I just kind of froze up. It was so unexpected. All of a sudden I heard someone yelling, "Let them go! Those are my kids! Someone stop her!" My mom was running full sprint across the court. I had never seen the look in her eyes before. People immediately grabbed my aunt and got my brother and I away from her. Apparently, she was charged with attempted kidnapping, and my mom did press charges. We have a restraining order against her now as well. I'm 23. My cousins took my brother and I to get some food, so I don't remember much of the police part, aside from telling them what happened. I only learned once I got older that the main reason my parents sat my brother and I down was because at the time my aunt had started blackmailing my parents into paying all of her bills, phone, rent, medical, etc. She would send them pictures of our house and my brother and I playing outside, saying she would take care of us if the money stopped. Her grabbing us at the basketball game was right around when my mom and dad approached her ex-husband about the blackmailing. He was a lawyer, so they were coming up with some kind of plan together. I work as a secretary at my mom's office now. A year ago, I picked up a typical call, but it was not typical at all. "Hi, this is my name. What can I help you with today?" "Why, hello there. It's your aunt again. Is your mom available?" "No, I'm sorry. I can take a message though." "Just tell her I'm free now, and I know where she is. I know where all of you are." Then she hung up. I told my mom and she told me it was okay, that I shouldn't worry too much. I still worry a lot though that she'll find me or show up at any moment to hurt me.